my personal objective is to cause more and more pain to Russia in terms of sanctions as much as possible.
Hello world, my name is Tetiana Gaiduk, it's Kyiv, not Kiev. And today I have a pleasure of speaking with Vladyslav Vlasiuk, a sanctions expert working on the Ukrainian presidential office and also a coordinator of the international working group on Russian sanctions. Vladyslav, a pleasure to see you in Kyiv, not Kiev.
Hello, hi.
So I just introduced you as a coordinator, or should I better say a secretary?
It's probably secretary.
It's a secretary
and then it is also an advisor to the presidential office. So this is kind of a twofold function.
And a deputy head of the task force UA.
Yeah, this is another job I do. It is the first deputy of the task force Ukraine, which is, joint effort of different state agencies of Ukraine, law enforcement mainly, with the objective to freeze and seize the assets of certain persons which committed aggressions against Ukraine.
I would like us to start with the International Working Group on Sanctions, which is also known to Ukrainians as the Yermak-McFaul group,
Right.
and to Westerners more a Stanford group. So who are its members and what are its powers?
Well, it was set, I guess it is now 15 or 16 months ago. It was a brilliant idea, and there are two co-chairs, Andriy Mak and Ambassador Yermak-McFaul from Stanford. And there are, I guess, now kind of 50 at least international experts which are members of that group. The experts in different areas, including the energy, the finance, the trade, the economy, with solid reputation and portfolio of different projects they've been involved in previously. And yeah, we've managed to release, I guess, 12 papers, which are lengthy documents with policy recommendations, how to make sanctions against Russia working more and more powerful. And then there are also some kind of non-papers and statements and sub-products. We've been working very much closely with the Kyiv School of Economics, KSE. So this has become, I guess, kind of the major platform for discussions in the area of sanctions in the world, which we are very proud of.
There are many brilliant minds in this group, and I believe they have plenty of ideas of how to sanction Russia and limited abilities to wage war more effectively. So here I just wonder, is there some kind of a filtering process through which all of these recommendations and ideas go through in order to be included in the action plans and official documents of the group?
Yes, I would say that when there is an idea coming up from every single member of the group, then this idea has been discussed at the gathering, which is almost always a Zoom call of all the members of the group.
How often does
I would say once in 2 weeks. So every member group can come up with some idea about new paper or statement or non-paper. Then the rest of the members, the participants of the group, would contribute their ideas to this potential concept or paper. So this is how those papers are being crystallized. I would say that every single paper is being crafted and developed by a very limited circle of people, kind of who are just typing the paper in a Google Docs. So
like how many?
Well, 5 to 10, like regularly.
So these are kind of coordinators
or financial. So those we can call it subgroups. This is, I mean, there is no much formalities about that. So if you're willing to contribute to a certain paper, you can just do your job and just contribute. So this is that easy. And then the final word is always on Ambassador Yermak-McFaul. So he is the final, let's say, check of the paper. He is very experienced in shaping their thoughts. He's very good with the words, so he would always kind of polish the final product, the paper, so it looks more shiny and it's more easy to read. So this is the way we've managed to produce all those papers.
I see. And does the group consider the ideas that come from within its members?
Well, of course, all the experts, this is completely pro bono activity. Nobody gets paid within this group. So they all have some primary activities, areas of interest, so they're very active scholars or economists, like senior ones, and they would always have access to some specific information which is partly relevant to the sanctions. This is always something which is very top level, and this is why this group is so successful, because every single paper is being then signed by group members, not all of them, but many of them. So every single paper is signed, I guess, not less than by 20 people, group members. And those names are very solid names. Not a single expert is connected with any government, which brings all that freedom, which brings all that loose about being capable to push on the governments to speak candidly about what ideas are lacking. So we've been pushing from the very beginning for a price cap not higher than $30 per barrel. And the time has shown that we were right from the very beginning. The 60, which was adopted, price cap, the oil price cap, it was kind of more a compromise, which led nowhere. So if at least in April it was implemented not 60 but 30, I guess we would take another 9 or 10 billion from Russia of revenues. So this is that simple.
Is it possible to join the group? And
Yeah,
if so, how?
Well, I think that every couple of weeks another bright person joins the group. So yesterday I just talked to another guy who originates from London, who is expert in oil market, very seasoned guy, and so I kind of talked with him. He already contributed with some analysis on oil shipments, so I advocated before Yermak-McFaul for him to allow joining this guy. So I think the decision will be made soon, and this is a way for the external people to join the group. So yes, this is possible.
In April, the group released the new Action Plan 2.0 to strengthen sanctions against Russia, and the action plan consists of 12 sections.
I guess so.
My question is there some kind of a prioritization of the working areas described in each of these actions, or are they equally important?
Well, it depends. It is always hard for the authors to pick any of those as more priority or not, but I would say that in my other capacity as the governmental, the part of the government, I would say that I've been pushing more for those sanctions, which would allow us to decrease the capacity of Russia at the battlefield. So this is kind of the primary area. This is all about the missiles. This is all about the drones, and then I would say it would be the economy, which is about denying Russia from getting more money. So I would say that would be the second area. And third area, this is about weakening the Putin's regime, to which I guess contributes more the propaganda. So we've been always pushing hard on the propaganda. And the propaganda is to be listed by the governments of different of our state partners. So those would probably be three main areas. But you never know. You have to push in all the possible directions, because all the governments sometimes taking different decisions on different potential opportunities. So you can succeed with some ideas with one country but fail with another, and you go into another country and this is just vice versa. So you just have to push those. This is why the very idea of having all those potential ideas or avenues to discover in terms of sanctions in one place, in one paper, this is why this is so much convenient.
So this your previous answer leads me to another question. What are the priorities of Ukraine's state sanctions policy? So does it coincide with what you just described about action plan 2.0 priorities?
I would say that mostly yes. And President Zelensky himself reiterated the point about the battlefield capacity, mostly about the missiles and the drones. So he does care a lot about the lives of the people here in Ukraine, and given that one of the most threats to the civilians is caused by exactly the missiles, it is why the sanctions which would potentially stop this missile terror is the highest priorities for himself and for the Ukrainian government. Then I would say again, the denying the revenues, which is mostly about the energy, yes, this is a top priority. The propagandist, I can sure say that the propagandist is the top priority for President Zelensky, for Andriy Yermak, for the government. So in this area, yes, I mean, it is almost kind of the same priorities as the international group of experts also kind of decided.
Let's get back to the document itself. What is the process for the action plan from its presentation to its implementation in the sanction decisions of the partner countries and relevant organizations? What is the path of the document?
The implementation is all about communicating with the partners. So this is the most part of my job, which is to communicate with the government officials of the state partners and to encourage them to move on with implementing more and more sanctions, which can be, some of them can be just as the international group of experts suggest. Some of the sanctions can be just different sanctions. So we would always be flexible. Or my personal objective is to cause more and more pain to Russia in terms of sanctions as much as possible. So if, I don't know, you've probably seen that last week the Czech Republic introduced sanctions against a couple of individuals, Russian individuals. One of these is Yevtushenkov, a well-known tycoon, which was sanctioned also in Ukraine. This is kind of, okay, so if the guys in Czech Republic are ready to implement some national level sanctions against Russians, so then I will approach them, and I did, and suggest them more ideas whom to sanction. If it is, I don't know, if it is the United Kingdom, which are more or less ready and responsive to the idea of sanctioning the Rosatom, again, this is me, to make sure that they have all the relevant information, the evidence, the arguments, to make that implementation of the Rosatom sanctions idea, which it also originates from the international group of experts, to make it happen. If it is the United States, they have some other ideas. So I think that they are our, let's say, main partner in the implementation of sanctions against the producers of those microelectronics, microchips, all that stuff. So with them, we would have more deep discussions about sanctions in this area. So this is always kind of about the readiness to act and the ability from our side to suggest or to support with some additional evidence. And
how many people are involved in a communication with foreign partners?
Starting from President Zelensky himself, Andriy Yermak, the key ministers, Minister of Foreign Affairs, myself. I guess this is it, right?
How well coordinated are the states in a so-called sanctions coalition when it comes to implementing restrictions against Russia?
Well, I think that the level of coordination is kind of unprecedented. So I think that how often we communicate and how deeply and how much credit, trust in each other we have, this is kind of unprecedentedly high. Well, I mean, this is kind of more or less easy area to coordinate because this is sanctions against Russia, and on the very baseline idea, everyone within the sanction coalition, which is I guess 40 countries now, is more than ready to act to implement more sanctions against Russia. So this is kind of quite easy thing to communicate about. On the other hand, yes, of course, some countries, even within this coalition, are more hesitant about implementing some sanctions. So if you compare certain areas and how many sanctions being introduced against Russia in those areas by different countries, there are some different attitudes.
Is that from political reasons or the economic ones?
Well, I would say that mostly this is based on the economy. So different countries have different historically made ties and connections with Russia. So, like for instance, it is quite easy for the United Kingdom to stop buying energy from Russia because they've never been buying almost any. And then for the European Union, it was kind of a big victory to introduce the same ban for Russian oil and gas, given that the market was, I guess, 40% supplied by Russia. So this is, I mean, you can compare it, the same idea, same result, but it was very different, the originate position in that. On the other hand, given, again, the United Kingdom, I would say that designating the oligarchs for the United Kingdom is a little bit difficulter than for the European Union. Why? Because probably historically there have been a lot of oligarchs from Russia in London, including the opposition, which kind of made them a part of the establishment. So this is a little bit different, and if you check on, let's say, Mr. Lysin, who is sanctioned by almost any jurisdiction, but not in the UK, so this gives you some thoughts about what is going on.
So it's kind of a path to circumvent sanctions through Great Britain or through the countries which do not include such individuals in their sanctions list?
I wouldn't say that this is kind of circumvention, but then, yes, there are some countries, not the member sanction coalition, but then there are some countries which are probably contributing to the sanction circumvention, which is mostly third countries, like Central Asia countries.
Could you please name them?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so given the trade data we've seen, it's obviously Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan. Quite surprisingly, if you narrow the trade to the microelectronic, that would be also Serbia, Maldives Islands, Seychelles Islands, Turkey. So depends. I mean, I think that over the last year, the trade of EU-made products or items or goods with Russia was effectively quite the same, just diverted from the direct trade to the trade like re-exporting through the third countries. So, which effectively means kind of a problem is the level of sanction implementation, which is which made the 11th sanction package, which was just passed by the European Union, kind of focused on the implementation of sanctions. But again, if you take the European Union, what we don't like, it is, well, what we like, it is the unity that EU shows about the supporting towards Ukraine. What we don't like, it is that sometimes some EU member states are showing or displaying different degree of that support. So if it is about passing next sanction packages, that would be always Hungary and some other countries like Greece, like Malta, like Cyprus, which are hesitant about agreeing on some certain provisions to be included into a sanction package.
At the EU level, there are talks of the creation of a unified sanction body, or at least a position. So perhaps it makes sense to initiate kind of a similar international body. Can Ukraine advocate for such an initiative?
Well, I think that there is an idea of strengthening the capacity to monitor sanction implementation on the EU level, and at least they've introduced this position of the EU sanction, not coordinator, okay, but EU sanction, somebody official,
Officer.
which is Ambassador David O'Sullivan, who's a great guy. He's doing a lot of things, but then the implementation of sanctions is yet within the responsibility of the member states. So the Brussels cannot tell anyone how to implement the sanction. Which leads to different approach within different member states. So of course there are some, like let's say, hawkish countries, and there are some countries which kind of more maybe relaxed about implementing sanctions. If it is Greece, they would have no problem with stopping the next sanction package adoption just because the oil tankers have been listed on some website of the international sponsors of war. And even if we bring to them the evidence suggesting that at least 10% of all those shipments of oil made by the Greek oil companies were made with the violation of the price cap or some other sanction measures, they would still kind of be arguing and advocating for their companies. So this is the reality. Every country can have its economy interests, and it is kind of understandable that they would protect those interests. But at the same time, I would always respond that sometimes sanctions, it is more than just about the money. Quite unfortunately, but Russia is always giving more and more reasons for it to be sanctioned. Wait a sec, we have people dying every day, and you just have to show more actions, more decisive actions. We've been also thinking about more comprehensive trade bans against Russia, which would just ban, let's say, any items of certain codes completely, including the microelectronics. The problem with sanctioning the propaganda is the freedom of speech. This is not enough. This is yet not enough. We have to do more.